Hey, real quick before the video starts, some of you probably already know this, but recently James, Patrick, and Chris from the Schaffrillas Productions channel got into a car crash, and Patrick and Chris have passed away. I cannot stress enough how much of a genuine shock this was when the news came out. I'm at least happy that James is alright, but honestly I feel really bad for him because I cannot imagine losing any of the people I love. Patrick and Chris's deaths dealt a devastating blow to the Schaffrillas community, and they will be missed, and my heart goes out to their families. I'll link a GoFundMe page down in the description and down in the comments below, and if you have the time and if you have the money, obviously, go ahead and donate however much you want. To them, every penny counts. After last year, when I prematurely said that 2021 was one of the best animation years, 2022 was probably even better. Despite having some deeper corporate lows, there were so many more amazing highs this year, and not just for having so many great films, but a variety of styles and target audiences. This really was one of the greatest years of animation ever. But it's still not quite 2009. Also, we have not 34, but 39 films to talk about, so let's get right into it. Also, no, I'm not talking about the soccer football movie, though if you're curious, it's still not as bad as... Less is more, my friend, till the torture's end. And when will it end? Even though I talk about my placements and opinions being purely subjective, I think we can all agree that this was this year's worst output in animated movies. In retrospect, the initial fire and brimstone reaction to this movie was a bit much, since by now this movie is pretty much forgotten, and its existence has been overshadowed by Nimona being rescued by Netflix. Still, it doesn't change the fact that this represents everything wrong with corporate Disney nowadays. It took me the entire year to watch this movie in full, which says pretty much everything, but to give credit where credit is due, at least the creators had fun making it, and overall, it's an improvement over Ocean Waves. It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's a dog-eat-dog world. I can certainly understand people's immense attachment to Marmaduke, not liking it, just being fascinated by how utterly bonkers it is, but even with so many layers to its awfulness, I can't admit that it was anything engaging to me. All I'm going to say is that the animation is cheap, the voice actors sound tired, and what little plot there is goes in 7 different directions at the same time. I guess I could see casual viewers being entertained, but you're better off watching that out-of-context compilation on YouTube.
I want Morbius, not less. Are you sure, Bius? I guess. 'Cause I'm gonna lose my mind.
It's honestly incredibly insulting that this became the highest grossing animated film of the year, especially in comparison to a lot of other theatrical releases that deserved much better. But even without that, the story is awkwardly fractured, the character arcs are incredibly basic, and the animation is still kinda difficult to watch. There are certainly entertaining physical comedy segments, though I wonder why you wouldn't just watch Jackass instead, but other than that, it's just kind of sad that this is the state of animated movies we're in now. All the good ones get squandered over, while all the bad ones become the iconic moneymakers. At least whatever Tartakovsky is making slightly justifies Transylvania 4. Speaking of which... Hey, does anybody remember this movie? Like, anyone? Or was this just a fever dream that we all collectively had one day? I guess the animation's nice, and Brian Hull does a pretty great Jack voice, but yeah, this continues the trend of January movies being absolutely terrible, in which it isn't really terrible, but it is completely pointless. Johnny and Drax's relationship got retconned to hell, and now they hate each other? ? Oh well, can't wait for Unicorn Warriors Eternal to eventually come out. Chicken Hair is a movie about Chicken Hair, an individual who is a mix between a chicken and a hare, but he's mostly just hair, so you frequently forget he's part chicken. He teams up with a boring skunk and an annoying tortoise to find a mysterious MacGuffin in the mountains before his one-dimensionally evil uncle does, and on the way comes across Minecraft pigs. Because it's kind of exactly how it sounds, and it is heavily unremarkable, which isn't that far off for Netflix. But the only significant talking point in regards to this film is how genuinely problematic the message is. It's another one of those being different movies where they insinuate that the only way you can be accepted by others is to do something extraordinary, which is absolutely false. If you're being discriminated against, it's not up to you to get them to accept you, it's up to the people around you to look past their judgments and see you for the person you are. And I know that this is just a silly bad Netflix movie, but that needed to be said. Ah yes, the John Lasseter Leprechaun movie. I did like the beginning and the end since it showcased a lot of Sam and Hazel's adorable bond, and some of the slapstick regarding Sam's unluckiness is genuinely entertaining. But you do not need to sit through a feature of boredom to get glimpses of physical comedy, because a lot of the movie is slow, played out, and above all just unremarkable. I guess Simon Pegg was pretty cool, but that's about it.
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you.
Ah, Roderick rules. Unsurprisingly, this was not good, but this was surprisingly better than the first one. Rowley is the only somewhat likable character. They finally figured out how to fix Susan's mic, and Greg is definitely a better person in this franchise than in the books and the live-action films. He's also a lot more boring, so yippee! The narrative is played so completely straight, and the ridiculously fast pacing gives no time to develop the most important aspects of the book. But hey, this movie has Greg rickrolling a bunch of high schoolers, truly the epic Greg moment of the century. Even though the overpaid celebrities doing the voices sound tired, even though it being better than the likes of Smurfs and Tom and Jerry isn't saying much, and even though people give way too much praise just because of the cameos and its meta humor, I'd honestly say that I had fun with the Chip and Dale movie. I wouldn't necessarily say it's anything good, but it's not at all bad. I was kind of invested in the bond between Chip and Dale despite not being a very big fan of buddy comedies, and for as abundant as the cameos and meta jokes were, at least here they were narratively important. The Uncanny Valley of motion capture was pretty funny. I will say it's a little vile that the villain was a representation of an ex-child star that Disney left for dead in the past, but overall I'd say Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers is an okay time killer with some merit as a narrative and as a comedy. Also, everything that has to do with Ugly Sonic is hilarious. The Deer King is kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, its Maquia meets Princess Mononoke setup was intriguing, if not derivative, and sure, the parts with Van and Yuna were wholesome and sweet, the doctor's struggle to find a cure for the widespread disease was admirable, and the village was easily the best part of the movie. But otherwise, this film is so obsessed with the idea of constant exposition and lore detail that its large-scale story becomes too inconceivably dense to follow. I have next to no idea what exactly Van's inner struggle is supposed to be. I pretty much disliked everything about the first act before getting to the village, and this movie has a pretty weird ending. When an imperial civilization threatens to control an ancient colony, you'd think this would be a setup for an anti-imperialism message, but nope. It is quite boring, but its moments of sentiment were pretty sweet, but it does borrow a lot of elements from other better works, so it's a mixed bag. I don't remember a whole lot of details from Lightyear, but at the same time, I don't really want to go back and rewatch it, and upon further reflection, I feel like I was a bit too nice to this movie, and it's gotten a bit worse with time. I feel like that says it all. It doesn't really make sense that this is the movie that Andy saw as a kid, considering its 2000s aesthetic heavily clashes with Toy Story taking place in the 90s. The world feels largely uninteresting because of how dull and bleak the locations look. Zurg as a villain is interesting conceptually, but he falls flat because of his clash with Buzz's character. Now, for comparison's sake, I liked Raya more than most, mainly because the characters felt like a unit and had personality, unlike Lightyear, where they really kind of don't. I guess Socks was pretty funny, and the action was kind of cool, but that's about it. I have very little to say about DC Super Pets, except for the fact that it's surprisingly pretty good. The characters were pretty sweet, Kevin Hartdogg's backstory was shockingly somber, and I sometimes forget that Dwayne Johnson is a good voice actor. The filmmaking is satisfactory, but the conflict and the fights are a little basic. Still, it's a pretty okay time with good comedy and fun moments.
But one soul lies anxious, wide awake.
I don't feel like talking about Revelations. It's okay for what it is, but it is definitely the weakest of the SMG4 movies. The action is cool, Melanie's arc is neat, the Terrence joke is hilarious, the lore is confusing, the villain's backstory sucks, and everything else is kind of average.
Into the thick of it. But we can't see where we're going.
In some ways, Don't Glease reminds me a lot about my feelings towards I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. Both are critically acclaimed anime films that I honestly couldn't get into, mainly because I wasn't a big fan of their concepts. Manic Pixie Dream Girl versus generic Outsiders into the Woods story. The main difference is, I was able to warm up to Pancreas over time since the narrative got better bit by bit as it went along, whereas Don't Glease is just a straight shot of ennui all throughout. I can't say that the characters stand out much, but there is something sweet about its imagery and artwork. The story had its moments despite its dragged out ending, but the main problem is the script, because it's just monologues on life lessons that try really hard to make the movie a tearjerker. It is adequate in that field, but it's just not my thing.
Find me in your dreams, 'cause you won't see me after tonight.
Intergalactic became a huge hit for animation fans this fall, but I personally couldn't connect with it that much. Sure, its animation is absolutely stunning to look at, and it is certainly better than a lot of other romantic comedies. The main couple is definitely adorable, what with them bonding over their passions and creative vision and artistic expression. I just had a numb experience with this because of how I've grown apathetic to a lot of romance tropes, to the point where the drama came across as a bit silly. It is literally not that hard to clear up a misunderstanding, nor is it difficult to just let someone explain themselves. Miscommunication is infuriating both in entertainment and in real life. Also, this being an adult animated movie with a very adult romance with adult themes, I thought was refreshing, but I became extremely uncomfortable whenever the moments got a bit steamy. This should explain why. Also, for being a romantic comedy, it wasn't all that funny. But the animation was awesome, and the ending is really cute, so I liked it, but I'd rather watch Ride Your Wave again. And speaking of Yuasa, a blind Biwa priest comes across an energetic scamp who was cursed with a hideous appearance, and they both decide to make it big by passing down unwritten tales of the Heike through rock and roll. Yuasa's style of filmmaking and storytelling tends to be hit or miss with people, especially with his abundance of psychedelic imagery, and this is far from my favorite Japanese historical fiction narrative that was released in 2022, but its riveting historical authenticity, as well as it having a cute bond between Tomoari and Inuo, make this an enjoyable watch. And for as ridiculously long as the songs are, they are very pretty, even if you can tell they reused a lot of frames in B-roll.
Tell me what's going on, where I went wrong, and what's the message in this song? Where are the lessons in this song?
Studio 4C has a track record of making bonkers stories, so it's nice that they finally made what is probably their most normal movie. But even though this movie is technically better than the last one I saw, I did miss the weird surrealism of Children of the Sea, which Fortune Favors Lady Nikuko is considerably lacking in. The fat jokes aren't all that funny, the conflicts between the kids are pretty dumb, and the final story of how Nikuko took her daughter in was interesting and pretty cute, but still rushed. Still, it's a cute movie about found family and the plights of childhood, and it's slice of life, so it wins. Kamiari Month is in the same vein as The Deer King for being an exposition slog, but unlike that other movie, the characters and dialogue are a lot of fun, and the protagonist's struggle over her grief of losing her mother comes off as genuine shock factor. The animation is rough, and the story has its plot points here and there, so this definitely won't be many people's favorite, but to me, this was a charming, sweet adventure flick that was great for what it is. Sonic 2 is probably the weakest Sonic product that has come out this year, but I still greatly enjoyed it for what it was. There are typical staples of CGI hybrid movies, and the marriage subplot is still a slog, but the slight adaptation of the Sonic 3 and Knuckles story was a lot of fun to sit through, and Idris Elba as Knuckles was practically perfect. I prefer this to the first movie easily, but given the options, I just play Sonic Frontiers again. A surprising amount of people online have said they had never even heard of this movie until after articles about it bombing at the box office came out. That should speak to how terrible the marketing of this movie is. That being said, while it's certainly not extraordinary in many people's eyes, I had a great time watching this. Sure, it had its weak points, but its design of the titular Strange World was amazing, especially given the twist later in the movie, and for as basic as the characters' arcs were, I found the interactions between them to be a little endearing. It's just that I, alongside many others, wish there was more to grab onto underneath all of that.
We're going on a trip in our favorite rocket ship, zooming through the sky, little Einsteins.
There are better animated mockumentaries, but Apollo 10.5 turned out to be a cozy and relaxing watch. The rotoscope animation is beautiful, its depiction of life in the 60s is charming, and the fictional plot of a kid being coerced into a space mission because he's good at kickball was a lot of fun and provided a lot of interesting astronaut trivia. This is a great movie for what it is.
I watch the moon, let it run my mood, can't stop thinking of you.
Summer Ghost's runtime of 40 minutes did mean that the script was tightly written enough to give sufficient time to flesh out the characters effectively, but I felt like it was robbed of some emotional moments as a consequence. Story-wise, 3 kids meet up during the summer to try and speak with a legendary ghost that appears when fireworks are lit at night. It's a very cozy and relaxing story about mortality, friendship, and the gift of life, but there were moments where I wanted to feel the emotions in certain scenes, but then it suddenly cut to another scene because it had to be condensed in its short runtime. Still, the plot is pretty sweet with some surprisingly grim tones, and I'd say I greatly enjoyed it, but it's not one of my favorite friendship stories.
Those gears, the music isn't me. Been a real long day, and we're dying to be free.
Earlier this year, we were given the anthology stop-motion horror movie, The House. Animation-wise, all 3 short stories are breathtaking, but script-wise, the quality varies. The first story was probably the most effective horror story, while the third story contained a sweet, melancholy message about letting go of unachievable dreams. I didn't really like the second story, mostly because I found the protagonist to be pathetic and incompetent, but otherwise, this is a great horror film that just falls short of rivaling others like Coraline or The Wolf House.
At the captain's wheel, he can spy out the horizon. Hands on deck, tally-ho, he cries. Silver...
The common pattern with animated movies that went directly to streaming this year is that their advertising was either inconsistent or non-existent, which is especially true for The Sea Beast, since it barely got more than a couple trailers, which is a shame because it's a fun and entertaining adventure film. The kaiju battles and sea monster designs are awesome. While the characters' journeys are a little standard, the dialogue is so much fun and full of charm and personality. It does have something to say about revisionist history, and the final battle makes this film. Sure, the movie's familiar story beats don't make it stand out all that much, but it is nonetheless a great and thrilling watch from beginning to end. It is unfortunate that the Bob's Burgers movie flopped at the box office, especially since it was likely the only non-anime 2D animated movie to be released in theaters this year. That said, it is a lot of fun. The humor is snappy and quick, and the murder mystery plotline was fun for what it was. Louise is, unsurprisingly, my favorite character, and I loved her arc. I will say Bob and Linda's burger hustle subplot got a little tiring, and the songs are just okay. But otherwise, a really good time that I recommend to anyone, even if I never saw any episode of the series.
Coming out to get you. Too bad that I won't let you. In these dark times, it's a hard life, but I'm never gonna let them take mine.
Henry Selick's return to form with Wendell and Wild also suffered from the worst marketing curse given by Netflix, and admittedly, it hasn't aged very well due to its story being very disparate and unfocused, but nonetheless, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I thought it was funny, I thought it was gorgeously animated, and I thought the characters were a blast. Key and Peele as the titular Wendell and Wild demons were especially entertaining, and the horror elements are great. Great job, Selick, you did some good.
Maybe I find myself sitting on that distant shore.
Bubble is easily the most overhated animated movie of 2022. With fun and exciting action scenes, killer music, endearing and lovable characters, and an adorable bond between our main duo, I was able to look past the film's narrative and technical flaws to appreciate its messages on living life to the fullest and the value of connecting with the people around you. But while I completely understand if people dislike this film for how admittedly shaky the story is, how inconsistent the animation is at times, and how bonkers the world building is, it honestly shocked me how many people disliked Bubble just because of Uta specifically. Whether it's because she's just another sexualized manic pixie dream girl, or she barely has any dialogue, that means she's a bad character. Aside from the fact that this is a really weird time to suddenly get mad about the manic pixie dream girl trope, considering how many other anime in past years use that trope in admittedly more problematic ways, but the trope honestly isn't that noticeable because unlike wish fulfillment stories, Bubble remembers to give the main girl a tangible character arc. Also, I couldn't figure out why people thought Uta's appearance was sexual. Again, this should explain why. And on the topic of silent characters, I personally find that if you remove a character's access to dialogue, it creates an opportunity for visual storytelling and heartwarming nonverbal communication, which this movie has a lot of, and I very much appreciate and like that. I also liked when the enemy team kidnapped someone to get views on YouTube. That was pretty funny. Like with Bob's Burgers, I have regrettably never seen anything from Rise aside from a few compilations, so this was my first experience with it, or anything TMNT related, and I loved it. Sure, it being watchable to new viewers might have been a slight against it for people who've watched the series, but everything else is pretty rad. Story-wise, it's a straightforward narrative about Leo overcoming his jokey and cartoonish mindset to rescue Raph and lead the others to defeat the Crane. I love all the emotional moments, I love the animation and the boss action, and I need more eldritch abominations in children's media. I will say the comedy felt a little lacking, but that's probably because it sort of clashed with the dark tone the movie was going for. Still an excellent movie. Turning Red is far from perfect, but upon rewatch, I ended up loving it a lot more than I initially did. The look and feel of the movie just oozes incomprehensible adorableness, and the fantastical coming-of-age tale of a middle school girl coming to terms with growing pains and new emotions was a joy to watch, while also delivering some hard-hitting emotional moments, some of which were more effective than the first time I saw it. Its display of May and her mother's complicated relationship hits home, and I love every single moment with Miriam, Priya, and Abby. And the songs are kind of amazing. Admittedly, the entire Red Panda transformation isn't elaborated on enough, robbing this film of some genuine stakes, but it is undeniably a fun watch, at times feeling like a weird fever dream, and that climax is just incredible. This movie is just a ball of fun overall, and it honestly gives off strong Mamoru Hosoda vibes. Ironically, a movie with the word bad in its title isn't bad at all. Bad Guys is loads of fun. While the basic redemption narrative is easily the weakest part aside from the predictable twist at the third act, the simplicity of the story gives way to great comedy, some tense action, and fun character dynamics. All of the voice actors did great. While the hype for the new Puss in Boots movie may have caused the perception of this film to falter a bit, it doesn't change the fact that this was a fun DreamWorks flick all throughout. Putting aside the fact that this film also suffered from terrible marketing, I thought The Girl from the Other Side was lovely. It had a very adorable and gut-wrenching father-daughter bond between a girl and a demon, and this beautifully hand-drawn animation gives off a whimsical atmosphere even in the most mundane situations, kind of like a picture book. The story was okay. It's one of those movies where the words monsters and curses are thrown around a lot, so you already know what most of the story is about. But as said, this film is wonderfully atmospheric and charming to the brim, and you should definitely save this movie for a rainy day. In the realm of anime films, Drifting Home was one of my most anticipated movies of the year, being made by the same studio that made Penguin Highway and A Whisker Away, two movies that I enjoyed quite a lot. And right now, this is easily my favorite film from Colorado. Conceptually, a story about a group of kids drifting in the sea with an abandoned apartment complex as their vessel doesn't sound up my alley, but the execution makes all the difference. I got so invested in the complicated relationships between the kids, conveying every conceivable emotion from joy to resentment to heartbreak. It's just a beautiful tale about rebuilding broken childhood friendships. And this world of structures that function as boats is limited, but it's a great source of exploration. And in general, I love any story where the main boy and girl remain friends. Movies don't need pointless hetero romances.
I know now that love is beautiful. I know now.
Alright, Del Toro's Pinocchio is obviously fantastic. Its spectacular stop-motion animation, marvelous direction, and intriguing retelling of the tale of Pinocchio make this film. However, this was originally much higher on the list, but I ultimately decided to knock it down a few spots. The characters are not nearly as compelling as certain other works that came out this year. The songs range from okay to pretty bad. The villain song is atrocious, but Ciao Papa is very cool. But far and away, my biggest issue with this movie is how the whole anti-fascist plotline feels tacked on to the narrative. It's a good contrast between Pinocchio and Candlewick's family dynamics, and it serves to pose a question of, would you rather fight for your family or for your country? But it feels very one and done and then forgotten about. Nevertheless, just from its animation and atmosphere alone, this is already worth multiple viewings.
Permission from the crown to put a scoundrel down. I've earned it. I'm licensed to kill. You couldn't get a learner's permit.
The second chapter of Crown Handler was an excellent entry in the Princess Principal franchise, and for personal taste, better than the first chapter, released last year. It is definitely better paced, with a much more grand, mysterious, and engaging storyline than the first, and I didn't dislike the first one's Battle of Wits plotline, but it was missing a lot of action. Now, this isn't perfect, mind you. The new character Mary, I felt didn't get enough screen time, though she'll probably have more to do in the next movie, and this entry didn't have the same level of character development like in the first chapter, but then we get to the climax and it goes hard. Awesome action and set pieces with intense sequences around bombs, plus a massive WTF cliffhanger ending with a twist that suggests that there are tensions within the royal family. It's overall a truly excellent addition to the Princess Principal series, and it still has the best OP of all time. I loved The Last Wish. I love the paintbrush aesthetic of the 2D 3D hybrid animation. The design of the Dark Forest is interesting and provides a lot of opportunities for standout moments, and the dialogue is so much fun. I enjoyed pretty much every character except for the John Mulaney pie villain. I didn't really care about him. Puss's struggle with his mortality and fear was ultra compelling, and the bonds he mends with Kitty Softpaws and Perrito are incredibly endearing and in some cases utterly wholesome. I love Goldilocks and the Three Bears as found family foes. Their subplot was very cute and tugged at my heartstrings, and this wolf is the best villain of the year hands down. Every time he shows up, I experience raw fear at 200%. And have I mentioned that the action is kind of amazing? I didn't care much for the original Puss in Boots movie, so as a sequel, this movie is a godsend.
Said I'd understand when I'm older. Said I'd understand the things they do. Falls asleep on his shoulder in the break room.
Marcel is cute, plain and simple. It's not my favorite animated mockumentary because duh, but it is my favorite out of the two that came out this year. And all in all, I thought Marcel was charming, funny, well animated and shot, and bittersweet to a T. Marcel himself was a blast of wholesome, with some of the best delivery of jokes I've heard all year from Jenny Slate. The plot about him finding his lost family was sweet, while also having a small talking point about the downsides of internet popularity. Plus, it has a bit of the Arrietty effect, where you have a lot of fun just watching how a tiny character gets from place to place and how he lives in this house with his Nana. I can't say it's something for everyone, but it did make for a wholesome and fun experience that cannot be replicated anywhere else, probably. Yeah. It shocked me how good this was. Seeing a bit of harmony was probably one of my least anticipated movies in general because of my voiced exhaustion towards stories about overly giggly inspirational waifus inspiring an introverted main character, but the moment this film piqued my interest was when I found out that the token inspirational girl was a robot. It's interesting how even the tiniest detail can completely change your impressions on something, which is kind of how it's like watching this film all throughout. There are so many twists and surprises in this movie that I greatly enjoyed. To try and explain the premise, the movie starts with the titular AI character Shion arriving at school as a transfer student to test if her programming can fool people into thinking she's a human. Almost immediately, she becomes associated with Satomi, the daughter of the woman who invented her, and becomes determined to make her happy, along the way encountering a number of lovable friends and making them happy as well. All while Satomi and company have to keep Shion a secret from everyone else, since exposing her as a robot could put her mother out of her job. Now, admittedly, it's not perfect. It's not a problem that so many anime movies follow the formula of the first half being slice of life and the second half being overly dramatic, but it does get tiresome after a while. Plus, the antagonist isn't the best in the world. But aside from that, each of these characters have such personality, and the musical numbers, while not memorable bangers, are incredibly catchy and a lot of fun. It has one of the most shocking turn for the worst plot points, and the ultimate tearjerker of the film, a Tamagotchi. It's an amazingly spectacular and cute movie with many twists and turns, and I'm so glad it exceeded my expectations.
Come along with me, and the butterflies and bees.
2 years ago, we were blessed with the existence of Wolfwalkers, and this year the same studio gave us My Father's Dragon on Netflix, which because of that was kinda dealt an unfortunate hand in getting any attention. Now, not every Cartoon Saloon fan loves or even likes this entry. Many have expressed disappointment with the considerable lack of darkness and the abundance of comedic relief in comparison to their other works, and sure, it did take a while for Boris's voice to stick with me, but to me, this journey was childhood, adventure, and heartbreak rolled into a complete package. While the expedition feels fractured in some areas, the personal journeys that Elmer and Boris go through are extremely powerful. Elmer has to realize his negative emotions are leaking into his friendship, and Boris has to work through his fear and loneliness. Plus, the artwork and soundtrack are as good as always for Cartoon Saloon. It's no Wolfwalkers or Breadwinner, and it won't be everyone's favorite, but this is another excellent entry for Cartoon Saloon.
To a guy that made songs for games and fads and things I had to put my blood, sweat, and tears into. I got it back. Yeah, some of you are gonna move out 'cause you're grown now.
A movie so masterful that it completely threw off my upload schedule and destroyed my motivation to post anything. And I'm only half joking. But seriously, this movie is the complete package. It's funny, it's heartwarming, it's beautiful, it is brimming with personality, and above all, it is a love letter to film. Where other movies in recent years have struggled with juggling too many characters, I feel like Pampa the Cinephile handles a large cast very well by exploring the different dynamics and relationships between people of different backgrounds and roles. Even if some of them are underutilized, I still can't get enough of Natalie. And I think what makes this movie work so well is that the characters are representative of different approaches to personal passion that not only give life to the story, but also to the in-universe movie that they're filming. That, along with some of the best editing in recent memory and some great consistent comedy in the dialogue, is what makes this movie so amazing to me. It also helps that it doesn't mindlessly glorify the industry, because let's just say some of the decisions the big companies have been making haven't been in their creators' best interests.
People, how the people, and if you're homesick, give me your hand and I'll hold it.
Yeah, at this point it shouldn't even come as a surprise. Belle is just my favorite thing to have come out in 2022, technically. It serves to highlight that in this day and age, especially with online culture, we need more people like Suzu. Just an unrelenting, kind, and altruistic person who desires to inspire and help others in their time of need. Its depiction of the internet acknowledges the hateful and petty culture, but it also suggests that there is good to be found. You just have to look in the right places. And sometimes those right places aren't large crowds of followers, but instead small circles of people you trust enough to share your joys and struggles with. Putting aside its powerfully presented themes that I've already discussed in another video, the bond between Suzu and the Beast is inspiring as it is heartwarming. The characters are some of the most human in anything I've seen, the songs are majestic, with Lend Me Your Voice being my personal favorite, and the animation is drop-dead gorgeous. This movie is everything I could have hoped for and more, and it is, to put it simply, beautiful. It is imaginative, it is heartfelt, it is transcendent, it is cinema. And I hope more people will check it out. So that's 2022 in animated movies, and while I didn't get to see everything, I can honestly say that I saw all that I wanted to see in the year for once. I don't expect 2023 to top this year, but I am nonetheless happy to be looking forward. And also because I'm graduating high school this year, so wish me luck. Also, by the time this video comes out, I'll be switching computers, which means my editing style in the future might change a little, and there might be a gap between this and the next video, whenever that is. Anyway, tell me, what were your favorite animated movies of 2022? Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thank you for watching, and catch you next time.